Pretend to be my wife. The millionaire begged the waitress. The reason left her speechless. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get into today's story. Have you ever been in a situation where someone with all the power and money tests you, thinking you are just a pawn in their game, only to realize they've underestimated you? Well, this story is just like that. Meet Anna. Anna was a waitress at one of the busiest and most upscale restaurants in New York City. She worked long hours, barely making enough to pay for rent and utilities, but she always wore a smile. She didn't complain. She was quiet, polite, and did her job well, never expecting much in return except a tip here and there. But Anna had a secret, one that she hid from everyone around her. She wasn't just any ordinary waitress. Her life before working at the restaurant had been much different. In fact, she had once been part of a wealthy family, with a beautiful apartment overlooking Central Park, designer clothes, and the kind of lifestyle most people could only dream of. But that all changed when her father's business fell apart. A series of bad investments, coupled with his trust in the wrong people, led to his financial ruin. Her family lost everything. Anna had to leave her luxurious life behind and take on multiple jobs to survive. Now, she found herself in a situation where she had to deal with people like Victor Langston, a billionaire businessman known for his ruthless nature and arrogance. He owned several companies and had a reputation for testing people, seeing how far they would go for money or status. He believed that everyone had a price, especially those working in service industries. One day, Victor walked into the restaurant where Anna worked. He was dressed in an immaculate suit, his presence commanding the room as he walked toward his table. Anna, being the professional she was, approached him and took his order. She had served him before, and he was like any other customer, arrogant, expecting to be treated like royalty. But this time, something was different. After placing his order, Victor looked at her with a smug smile. I'll give you $5,000 if you pretend to be my wife for a day, just for a charity event I'm attending tonight. What do you say? Anna was taken aback. She had heard of men offering money for things like this, but never expected to be asked herself. She paused for a moment, wondering if she should just refuse. After all, it was absurd. But the thought of the money, enough to pay for her rent and several bills, made her hesitate. $5,000? She asked, keeping her voice steady. That's right, Victor said, tapping his fingers on the table. I need a woman by my side, someone to make it look like I have a wife. You can wear anything you want, just play along. It's easy money, I'm sure you can handle it. Anna looked at him, sizing him up. She had dealt with men like him before, arrogant, entitled, and used to getting what they wanted. But there was something about his challenge that made her feel uneasy. Still, the temptation of money was too strong. She agreed, telling herself it would be just for one night, just one evening in which she would pretend to be someone she wasn't. But little did Victor know, this was not going to be a simple game of power. That evening, as she walked into the charity gala, dressed in a sleek black dress that she borrowed from a friend, she felt a sense of determination rising inside her. She would pretend to be his wife, yes, but she would not be anyone's fool. What she didn't expect, however, was how the night would unfold, and how Victor's game would soon be turned upside down. The evening was filled with rich men and women mingling, making business deals and chatting about things that Anna could hardly relate to. But Anna's presence by Victor's side seemed to capture the attention of more than a few guests. They looked at her as if she was something new, something different. And that's when she realized, for the first time in a long while, that she was more than just a waitress. She wasn't just there to serve drinks and bring food to rich people. She had her own story, and tonight, she would make sure that story was told. I had agreed to pretend to be his wife for just one night, but I quickly realized that Victor Langston had no idea what he was getting himself into. The charity event was held in a lavish ballroom in downtown Manhattan. The grand chandelier above cast soft light over the elegant guests, who were dressed to the nines in designer gowns and tuxedos. Victor, standing at the center of the room, looked every bit the part of a powerful billionaire, his expensive suit and commanding presence easily making him the focal point of the event. I, on the other hand, felt out of place, not just because I was dressed in an elegant black dress, but because I was a far cry from the people around me. I wasn't used to this kind of attention, and yet, I was suddenly thrust into the spotlight as his wife. It was all surreal. As we mingled, I noticed how people looked at me differently now that I was associated with Victor. They smiled. They spoke to me more warmly than they ever would have if I had simply been the waitress at the restaurant. But I wasn't fooled. I knew what they saw, a woman with status, a woman who could offer them something. Victor's wealth. I was merely an accessory to him. But the more I watched him interact with the others, the more I realized how empty his world seemed. He spoke about business deals, stock markets, acquisitions, endless streams of numbers, power, and domination. His life was entirely transactional. He was so detached from the people around him, and I began to wonder if he ever saw anyone as more than just a means to an end. Then, as the evening went on, I had a strange encounter. A group of guests approached us, their conversation flowing between formalities and empty pleasantries, until one of them, a woman with sharp eyes and a cold smile, asked me something I wasn't prepared for. "So, tell us, how did you two meet?" she inquired, her gaze unwavering. The question seemed innocent enough, but it was clear she wasn't asking out of curiosity. She was trying to size me up. I glanced at Victor, expecting him to answer. But instead, he looked at me expectantly, as if waiting for me to play my part. For a brief moment, I froze. This wasn't part of the plan. Pretending to be his wife was one thing, but sharing a backstory, making up details about a relationship I had no part in, was something else entirely. I could feel the pressure mounting. I had to answer, and fast. I had two choices. I could play along and make up some elaborate story, or I could break character and risk losing everything. The thought of losing the money I so desperately needed made the decision clear. I smiled, my voice steady. "We met through mutual friends," I said, the words flowing easily from my lips. It was a chance encounter, really. But since then, we've shared a lot of wonderful experiences together. The woman seemed satisfied, and the conversation moved on, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. This was the game Victor played every day. People who only existed to serve him, to entertain him, to feed his ego. But as the night wore on, I began to see something that unsettled me even more. Victor wasn't just playing a game with everyone else. He was playing it with me, too. We walked outside together, the cool night air hitting my face as the lights of the city flickered in the distance. "You handled that well," Victor remarked, his tone almost casual, as if we were discussing the weather. I didn't respond immediately. I wasn't sure how to respond. He looked at me, his eyes intense, as if searching for something deeper. "You're more than just a waitress, aren't you?" he asked, his voice lower now, more serious. "You're smart, I can tell." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his words. What did he want from me? Was this just another test? I knew one thing for sure. Victor Langston didn't ask questions unless he already had the answers. His power, his wealth, his connections, they all made him someone who was always 3 steps ahead of everyone around him. But I wasn't going to let him get the better of me. I'd already lost too much. The last thing I was going to do was let him think I was some pawn in his game. "I'm exactly what I appear to be," I replied coolly, maintaining my composure. "Hey, waitress. Nothing more, nothing less." He studied me for a moment, his expression unreadable, before giving a small smile. "I think you're lying," he said softly. "But that's okay. Everyone has secrets. Even the people who think they've got it all figured out." I didn't say anything. I just walked ahead, leaving him behind, wondering if he even realized just how much he was underestimating me. I had barely made it to my apartment that night when the reality of what had happened began to hit me. Victor Langston, the billionaire I had thought was just another arrogant man with too much power, had somehow shaken me. The way he looked at me earlier, the way he seemed to see something beneath the surface, I wasn't sure if it unsettled me more or made me want to prove him wrong. I thought about the charity event, how I had been nothing more than a pawn in his game. But what did he really want from me? Was this some sort of power play, or had I become something more to him? As I sat on my couch, the only sound in the room was the faint hum of the city outside my window. I couldn't stop replaying the moment when he said, "I think you're lying." What did he mean by that? My thoughts were interrupted by the loud buzz of my phone. I glanced at the screen, and my heart skipped a beat. It was a message from Victor. Meet me tomorrow at 9 in the morning. I need to talk to you about something important. I stared at the message for a moment, my mind racing. Why was he reaching out again? Was he going to try to play some other game, or was he finally going to get serious about whatever was between us? I had no idea what he wanted, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let him walk all over me again. The next morning, I walked into his office with a sense of calm determination. I had no idea what to expect, but I wasn't about to let him see me sweat. His office was just as impressive as the man himself. The walls were lined with sleek wood panels, and the view of the city through the floor-to-ceiling windows was breathtaking. He was already sitting behind his desk, dressed in yet another perfectly tailored suit, his eyes sharp and calculating as he looked at me. "Sit," he said, his voice as cold and commanding as ever. I sat across from him, waiting for him to speak. "I've been thinking about our conversation," he began. "You're not just a waitress, are you?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I just looked at him, waiting for him to continue. He leaned forward, his gaze intense. "I want to make a deal with you." I raised an eyebrow. "What kind of deal?" I asked, already sensing that this was no ordinary business proposition. "I want you to work for me," he said, his words hanging in the air. "I've been watching you. You've got more potential than anyone I've met in years." His eyes narrowed as he studied me. "You think I'm just some rich businessman, don't you? Someone who doesn't know what it's like to struggle." I stayed silent, unsure of where this was going. "But I'm not. I know what it's like to have nothing. I know what it's like to fight for every inch of ground you get." His voice softened slightly. "And that's why I want you. I see something in you, something that most people miss. I don't care about the past, Anna. I care about what you can do." He leaned back in his chair, letting his words sink in. "What do you say?" I was taken aback. Work for him? It seemed like a ridiculous offer, especially after everything that had happened between us. But as I sat there, I realized something. I was tired of being underestimated. Tired of playing the game by everyone else's rules. Maybe this was my chance to take control of my own destiny, to prove to myself that I was capable of more than just waiting tables. "What's the catch?" I asked, my voice steady. He smiled, but it wasn't a smile that made me feel at ease. It was calculating, like he was already planning his next move. "The catch is simple," he said. "You work for me, and I'll make sure you never have to worry about money again. I'll give you everything you need, resources, connections, opportunities. All you have to do is prove that you're as capable as I think you are." I hesitated for a moment, weighing my options. I could walk away, tell him no, and go back to my old life. Or I could take a chance, take the risk, and see where this strange partnership would lead. "I'll do it," I said, surprising myself with how quickly the words came out. He nodded, a satisfied smile playing at the corners of his lips. "Good," he said. "Welcome to the team." But as I left his office that day, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just made a deal with the devil. Victor Langston might have just given me the chance of a lifetime, but I knew that nothing in his world came without a price, and I wasn't sure I was ready to pay it yet. I walked out of Victor Langston's office that day with mixed feelings. The deal was done. I had agreed to work for him, but something in me was uneasy. It was as if I had stepped into a world I knew nothing about, a world where money and power ruled, and where people like me were nothing more than tools for someone else's gain. I had accepted his offer, but I wasn't entirely sure I was prepared for what came next. Over the next few days, I found myself in the whirlwind of his world. My first task was to attend a high-level meeting with some of the biggest investors and business leaders in the city. Victor had made it clear that he wasn't just hiring me for my skills. He wanted me to become part of his empire, someone he could trust. As the meeting began, I sat at the back of the room, observing the men and women who dominated the room. They all looked like they had it together, as if they had everything under control. But when Victor spoke, everyone listened. He had a way of commanding the room, of making people believe in whatever he said. I watched him closely, studying his every move, his every word. This was a man who had built an empire from the ground up, and it was clear he knew exactly how to maintain control. At one point, Victor turned to me and asked, "Anna, what do you think about this proposal?" His question was directed at me, and for the first time since I had entered his world, I felt a surge of confidence. I had been sitting quietly, listening to the discussions, and something clicked in my mind. I stood up, my voice calm and steady as I addressed the room. "The proposal looks solid," I said, but I think we need to consider the long-term impact on the market. The risks outweigh the immediate profits, and I believe we could find a better strategy if we shift our focus toward more sustainable investments. The room went silent. I could feel every eye on me. I had just gone against the grain, and the people in this room weren't used to hearing someone challenge their ideas, especially someone like me. But Victor's gaze never wavered. He didn't seem surprised, just intrigued. After a long pause, he nodded. "I like that," he said, his voice deep and thoughtful. "You're right. We need to think bigger." It was a small moment, but it felt like a victory. I had earned his respect, and maybe even the respect of the others in the room. After the meeting, Victor approached me with a small smile. "That was impressive," he said. "You've got a good head on your shoulders. I'm glad I brought you on board." I didn't know what to say. For the first time, I felt like I was starting to find my place in this world. But then, just as quickly, the unease I had been pushing aside came rushing back. What was I really doing here? Was I just another one of Victor's pawns, or was I truly making a difference? The days that followed were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and constant pressure. Victor kept me close, giving me more responsibilities, more opportunities to prove myself. And I did. I worked harder than I ever had in my life, determined to show him that I was more than just a waitress who had somehow stumbled into his world. But the more I worked, the more I began to see the cracks in his empire. The power, the wealth, it was all so fragile. Everyone in Victor's world was out for themselves, and loyalty was a rare commodity. I began to see that Victor, for all his brilliance and charm, was just as trapped as anyone else in this game. One evening, after a particularly intense day, I sat in my apartment, staring at the city lights outside. I thought about everything I had been through to get to this point, about the choices I had made, and whether they were truly the right ones. I had come from nothing, and now I was here, sitting at the top of the world. But at what cost? Was it worth it? Just then my phone buzzed. It was a message from Victor. "Meet me at the office in an hour. We need to talk about something important." I frowned, uncertain of what he wanted now. I had been expecting a break, a chance to rest, but it seemed like the game never stopped. I grabbed my coat and headed out, unsure of what I was walking into. When I arrived at his office, Victor was standing by the window, looking out at the city. He didn't turn when I walked in. "You've been doing great," he said, his voice serious. "But there's something I need to tell you. Something that could change everything." My heart skipped a beat. What was he about to say? What did he want from me now? I stood there, waiting, as Victor finally turned to face me. His expression was unreadable. "You've proven yourself," he said. "But there's one more thing you need to do. And it's going to be harder than anything we've done so far." My mind raced. What could possibly be harder than everything I had already faced? He smiled faintly, almost as if he enjoyed watching me squirm. "I need you to go undercover. I need you to infiltrate one of my biggest competitors, and I need you to bring back information that will help us crush them." My stomach dropped. This was it. The real test. I had been playing in his game all along, but now it was time to fully commit. I had no idea what I was getting myself into, but one thing was certain. I had crossed a line, and there was no going back. I stood there, trying to process Victor's words. The weight of what he had just asked me to do hung in the air like a storm cloud. Go undercover? Infiltrate one of his biggest competitors? I thought I had been prepared for anything, but this was different. This was personal, and this was crossing a line I wasn't sure I was ready to cross. I had come into Victor's world thinking I could handle the pressure, thinking I could play the game and come out on top. But now it was becoming clear that this wasn't just a game anymore. The stakes were higher than I had imagined. "Why me?" I asked, my voice steady, though inside, I felt a whirlwind of uncertainty. Victor turned to face me, his expression cold and unreadable. "You're the one I trust, Anna," he said. "You've proven yourself time and time again. You see things others don't. You're smart, and you're resourceful. That's why I need you to do this. I'm not asking you to play nice. I'm asking you to do whatever it takes to get the information we need." I looked at him, trying to read his face. Was he really asking me to betray everything I had worked for? Was I about to sell out for a man who had never been anything but a ruthless business tycoon? But in that moment, I also realized something. I had come too far to turn back. I had already chosen this path. Turning down Victor now would mean going back to the life I had before, one filled with struggle and survival, with no real future to speak of. But this was an opportunity. An opportunity to prove that I was more than just a waitress. More than just someone who had to play by the rules set by people like Victor. I was someone who could play the game and win. All right, I said, surprising myself with the calmness in my voice. I'll do it. But I want to make one thing clear. I'm doing this my way. I won't be anyone's pawn. Victor's lips curled into a faint smile. That's exactly why I picked you. He handed me a folder with the details of the assignment. Inside were documents, names, and a detailed plan of how I was supposed to infiltrate the company. It was all laid out. A perfect blueprint for what seemed like a perfect crime. You'll need to get close to their CEO, Victor said, his tone turning serious again. Get him to trust you. Learn everything you can about their plans, their weaknesses, and report back to me. You're good at reading people. This is your chance to use that skill. Don't hold back. I took the folder, feeling a mix of excitement and dread wash over me. I knew this wasn't going to be easy. I knew it was going to test everything I had learned, every ounce of my willpower, and every bit of my integrity. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that there was no turning back. This was the chance I had been waiting for. I spent the next few days studying the company I was supposed to infiltrate. The names in the folder were a who's who of the business world, powerful men and women who controlled billions of dollars, companies that had their fingers in almost every industry. But the one person who stood out to me was their CEO, a man named Richard O'Reilly. Richard was known for being a visionary, someone who had built his empire from nothing. He had a reputation for being ruthless when it came to business, but also for being incredibly charismatic. And it was this charisma that Victor wanted me to use to my advantage. I would need to charm him, gain his trust, and then dig deep into the heart of his company. It wasn't going to be easy. Richard O'Reilly wasn't the type of man who trusted easily. He had built his empire by knowing when to trust people and when to cut them out of his life. But I had an advantage that most of his employees didn't. I wasn't afraid of him. I wasn't intimidated by his power or his wealth. I had already dealt with men like him, and I knew exactly how to play the game. The first meeting with Richard was set for the following week. I was nervous, but I didn't let it show. I had a plan, and I was going to stick to it. I arrived at the office, dressed in a professional suit that I had borrowed from a friend. I walked into the building, trying to act confident, though my heart was racing in my chest. Richard was already in his office, waiting for me. He stood up when I entered, his eyes studying me intently. "Anna, it's a pleasure to finally meet you," he said, his voice smooth and confident. "I've heard a lot about you." I smiled, extending my hand. "The pleasure is mine, Mr. O'Reilly." His grip was firm, and I could see the calculating look in his eyes. This wasn't going to be as easy as I had hoped. He didn't trust me, not yet. But that was okay. I wasn't here to make friends. I was here to do a job. We spent the next hour talking about business, about the direction his company was going, and about the opportunities he saw in the market. He was sharp, no question about it. But as the conversation continued, I began to notice something. Richard wasn't just interested in business. He was interested in me. His questions weren't just about my work experience or my knowledge. They were personal, probing, as if he was trying to get to know me better. And for a moment, I wondered if this was part of his plan, to get close to me, to make me feel comfortable so that I would let my guard down. I could play along. But in the back of my mind, I knew this was all part of the game. And I was ready to win. I woke up the next morning, my mind racing with everything that had happened over the past few days. The deal was sealed. I was officially in Victor Langston's world now, playing a game that seemed to get more complicated with each passing hour. The lines between right and wrong, loyalty and betrayal, had all started to blur. And if I was honest with myself, I wasn't sure where I stood anymore. Richard O'Reilly had been exactly what I expected. Charming, charismatic, and impossible to read. Every time I thought I had him figured out, he would shift just enough to keep me off balance. But I wasn't in the business of playing games with men like him. I was here to get the information Victor needed, and that was it. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of meetings, long hours, and constant pressure. Richard seemed to enjoy keeping me on my toes, always pushing me to do more, be more. He would test me in small ways, asking questions about my past, my ambitions, my life before this. Each time trying to see if I would slip, if I would give him anything to use against me. But I stayed calm, always keeping my answers measured, never revealing too much. I knew this game, and I knew how to play it. It wasn't long before I started to gain Richard's trust. Slowly, I was being invited to more exclusive meetings, included in high-level discussions that I never would have had access to before. And with each conversation, I learned more about his company, its weaknesses, its plans for the future, its strategies for growth and expansion. I started to compile everything I was learning, noting every little detail, every shift in the way Richard spoke about his competition. He didn't know it, but I was already a step ahead. As the days passed, I began to notice something else, something that made me uncomfortable. Richard's interest in me wasn't just professional. He would find small reasons to be around me, to spend time with me outside of business hours. At first, I thought it was just part of his usual charm. But soon, it became clear that this was more than that. There was an intensity in the way he looked at me, a curiosity that bordered on obsession. One evening, after a long meeting, Richard invited me to dinner. It wasn't unusual for him to do this. He had done it with other colleagues before, and I had always politely declined. But this time, I didn't say no. I wasn't sure why. Maybe it was the constant pressure of the job. Maybe it was the way he made me feel like I was the only one in the room. Or maybe, just maybe, I was starting to enjoy the attention. We went to a small, quiet restaurant, tucked away from the usual crowds of Manhattan. The ambience was intimate, the lighting soft, and for a moment, I almost forgot where I was. Richard seemed to sense my unease and immediately set me at ease, offering a small smile. "You look beautiful tonight, Anna," he said, his voice low and sincere. I looked up at him, surprised by the sincerity in his tone. He wasn't the type of man to offer compliments without a reason. "Thank you," I replied, my voice soft. "You're not what I expected," Richard continued, his eyes locking onto mine. "I thought you'd be just like the others, ambitious, calculating. But you're different. You're real." I shifted in my seat, trying to keep my composure. I wasn't sure what he meant by that, but I could feel my guard slowly coming down. This was part of his strategy, I told myself. Get me comfortable, make me trust him, and then use that trust to get what he wanted. "What do you want, Richard?" I asked, my voice steady. He smiled, his expression unreadable. "I want to understand you, Anna," he said softly. "I want to know what drives you. What makes you tick?" It was a simple question, but it rattled me. What did make me tick? What was I really doing here? Was I in this just for the money, or was there something else driving me? I didn't know. I didn't have the answer, and I wasn't sure I wanted to find out. But as the night wore on, I realized something. The deeper I got into this game, the harder it became to keep track of where I ended and where the game began. I was losing myself in the role I was playing, and Richard O'Reilly wasn't making it any easier. By the end of dinner, I felt a strange sense of unease. I was no longer just working for Victor. I was becoming part of Richard's world, whether I liked it or not. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized I wasn't sure which side of the game I was really playing for. As I left the restaurant that night, Richard's words echoed in my mind. "You're real." Was I? Or had I become something else? Something I wasn't ready to face? I walked into Victor Langston's office the next morning, my thoughts a jumble of confusion and doubt. The dinner with Richard O'Reilly still weighed heavily on my mind. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, I was questioning everything. Was I doing the right thing? Was I really ready to cross every line just to play this dangerous game? But Victor's world didn't offer room for second thoughts. Once he stepped in, there was no turning back. "Anna, good. You're here." Victor greeted me as I entered. He was sitting behind his desk, a pile of documents in front of him, looking every bit the powerful businessman he was. But there was something in his eyes today, something sharp, almost like he was waiting for something, or someone, to make a move. "You've been doing well," he continued, his voice calm and measured. "I've been watching you, and I'm impressed with how quickly you've adapted." I didn't say anything, just nodded. I had no intention of engaging in a conversation I didn't want to have. But Victor wasn't done. "But I need more from you now," he said, his tone shifting slightly. "I want you to take the next step. I need you to get closer to Richard. Get him to trust you even more. I want to know everything about his plans, what he's up to, where he's weak. His company is a threat to ours, and I need to be 2 steps ahead of him at all times." His words were sharp, cold. There was no room for hesitation. This wasn't just about gathering information anymore. This was about strategy, about taking control of an empire. I knew what he was asking me to do. I wasn't just a participant in this game anymore. I was a pawn, a tool. But the thought of going back to the life I had before this, broke, struggling, invisible, was more terrifying than anything Victor could ask me to do. "I'll do it," I said, surprising myself with how quickly the words came out. I wasn't sure if it was my pride or the weight of Victor's influence that made me agree so easily, but it didn't matter. I had made my choice. "Good," Victor said, his lips curling into a faint smile. "You're the only one I trust with this. But remember, there's no turning back now. Do what it takes. I need results." The gravity of his words hit me as I left his office. There was no turning back. I was already too deep in this world, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized how much power I had given away. I was no longer in control. The rest of the week passed in a blur of meetings, phone calls, and constant interaction with Richard. His interest in me was growing, and I could feel the tension between us mounting. He would seek me out, pulling me into conversations about everything: his business, his dreams, his fears. At times, it felt like I was the only one who truly understood him. He was an enigma, and for some strange reason, I found myself drawn to him, despite everything I knew about his ruthless nature. We spent long hours together, and over time, I started to feel like I was walking a fine line between two worlds. On one side was Victor, cold, calculating, demanding nothing less than total loyalty. On the other side was Richard, whose charisma and confidence made it hard not to want to trust him, to believe in him. I kept reminding myself of my mission. I was there to gather information, nothing more. But the more I interacted with Richard, the more I realized that he was not as easy to manipulate as I had thought. He could see through my facade, and he wasn't afraid to challenge me. One evening, as we sat together after a long meeting, he turned to me with a piercing look in his eyes. "You know, Anna, you're different," he said, his voice soft but full of intent. "Most people would be intimidated by me, but not you. I can see it in your eyes. You don't just want to play the game. You want to win it." I swallowed, trying to keep my composure. "Maybe I'm just tired of losing," I said, my voice low. He chuckled, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Maybe, but I think you're more than that. I think you're playing a much bigger game." I wasn't sure how to respond. He was right. I wasn't playing just for Victor anymore. I had started to play for myself, to make my own decisions, and that scared me. The lines between loyalty, ambition, and survival were getting blurry. As the days passed, I found myself spending more time with Richard, trying to understand him, to figure out what made him tick. He was a man driven by power, by the desire to control everything around him. But there was something more beneath the surface. He wasn't just the ruthless CEO everyone saw. He had layers, complexities that I couldn't fully grasp. And the more I tried to understand him, the more I found myself questioning my own motives. What did I really want? To survive? To succeed? Or was it something more? Something I wasn't ready to admit? As the tension between Victor and Richard grew, I realized I was in too deep. This wasn't just about gathering information anymore. It was about choosing sides, and I wasn't sure I was ready to make that choice. But with every passing day, I was becoming more entangled in both of their worlds. And the longer I stayed in the game, the harder it would be to get out. I walked into the office feeling like a stranger in my own life. The tension between Victor and Richard had reached a boiling point, and I was right in the middle of it. Victor's expectations of me had grown heavier with each passing day, and I could feel the pressure mounting. I had been playing a dangerous game, and now the stakes were higher than ever. Richard's trust in me had deepened over the past few weeks. He had started to confide in me more, to rely on my judgment in meetings, and I had begun to see the cracks in his empire, small details, fleeting comments, and secrets he was too proud to keep hidden. But as I gathered more information, I found myself growing more conflicted. I had never expected to feel this way, but Richard was more than just a businessman. He was someone who believed in something greater than himself, something I could understand. Ambition, yes, but also a kind of loneliness that only those at the top truly knew. As much as I tried to remain detached, I couldn't ignore the way his eyes lingered on me during those late-night meetings, or the way he'd make an offhand remark about how I was the only person who understood him. There was a connection forming, and it scared me. I had started this journey with a clear goal: gather information for Victor, stay loyal to him, and maybe, just maybe, climb my way to a better life. But now I was starting to question everything. Was I really just playing the game, or had I become part of it? Every day with Richard made me feel more like I was losing myself. I had never intended to get close to him, But somewhere along the way, I had. And now, I was questioning my own motives. Was I doing this because I wanted to prove something to Victor, or because I wanted to prove something to myself? I couldn't answer that, and it terrified me. It was late one evening when the situation escalated. I had just finished a meeting with Richard, discussing some upcoming mergers when he asked me to stay behind. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the city below. "Anna," he said, his voice low and serious. "I need to know something. Can I trust you?" His words sent a chill down my spine. Trust? He was asking me about trust now. This wasn't about business anymore. This was personal. I looked at him, trying to read his face. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice steady, but my heart racing. He sighed, leaning back in his chair, his eyes never leaving mine. "I've seen the way you've been with me, Anna. I know you've been working for Victor. I know what you're really after." My stomach dropped. Had he figured me out? Was this the moment when everything came crashing down? I had always kept my cards close to my chest, but now it felt like all my secrets were laid bare. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, hoping I sounded more convincing than I felt. Richard shook his head, a small smile playing on his lips. "Don't play coy with me," he said. "I know what you've been doing. I know about the meetings, the information you've been gathering for Victor." My mind raced. How did he know? Had Victor told him? Or had he figured it out himself? I had no idea. But I knew one thing for sure. There was no way I could lie my way out of this. I had to be honest. "You're right," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I've been working for Victor. But that's not all of it." Richard's eyes locked onto mine. "What do you mean?" he asked. "What else is there?" "I'm not just working for him anymore," I admitted, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "I'm working for myself, too. I want something more than just surviving. I want to prove that I'm more than just a waitress, more than just a pawn in someone else's game." Richard leaned forward, his gaze softening. "You're not just a pawn, Anna," he said quietly. "I've never seen you that way." There was something in his voice, a vulnerability I hadn't expected. For the first time, I saw Richard O'Reilly not as the powerful CEO, but as a man who was just as lost as I was. He was playing a game, too, and I wondered if he had ever truly known who he was playing it for. But before I could say anything else, his phone buzzed on the desk. He glanced at it, his expression darkening. "I need to take this," he said, standing up and walking to the window. I stood there, frozen for a moment, my mind racing with everything he had just said. Had I just crossed a line I couldn't come back from? I had no idea, but one thing was clear. I was in too deep now, and there was no turning back. The phone call ended, and Richard turned back to face me, his expression unreadable once again. "I need you to do something for me," he said, his tone shifting back to business. "Victor is planning something. I need you to find out what it is." My heart skipped a beat. This was it. The moment when I had to choose sides. I had already given up so much. Was I really ready to betray Victor, to choose Richard over everything I had worked for? But in that moment, I realized I had already made my choice. I had already crossed a line. "I'll do it," I said, my voice steady, despite the turmoil inside me. Richard smiled, a knowing look in his eyes. "I knew I could count on you." I sat at my desk late that night, the weight of Richard's request still fresh in my mind. The decision was made. I had crossed a line that I couldn't uncross, and now, I was deep in a game I had no idea how to win. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how far I had come from the person I was just months ago. I was no longer just a waitress in a small restaurant trying to make ends meet. I was tangled in a web of power, manipulation, and secrets. I glanced at the file Richard had given me earlier that day. It was everything I needed to carry out his plan, to take down Victor and find out what he was really up to. It felt strange, like I was reading someone else's life. But I had a job to do. A job that would either make me or break me. I had been working for Victor for weeks, gathering information, playing my role, pretending to be loyal. But deep down, I had always known this day would come. The day when I would be forced to choose a side. And now, that choice was in my hands. I had to gather the information for Richard, find out what Victor was planning, and get it back to him. It wasn't going to be easy. Victor was a master at keeping secrets. But I had learned a lot from him, and more importantly, I knew how to play the game. The next morning, I set my plan into motion. I knew exactly where to start. Victor was in a meeting with his top executives, and that was the perfect opportunity for me to slip in and get the information I needed. I spent the next few hours carefully navigating the office, speaking to a few of the employees I had built rapport with, gathering small pieces of information here and there. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I could feel the tension in the air as I made my way through the building. I knew Victor was getting closer to making a big move, something that could change everything. But what? That was the question I had to answer. I walked into the break room, casually grabbing a coffee, trying to act like I belonged. No one paid much attention to me. I wasn't important. But I didn't need to be. I just needed to get the right people talking. As I sipped my coffee, I overheard a conversation between two of Victor's assistants. They were discussing a high-stakes deal, something that Victor had been working on in secret. It wasn't public knowledge yet, but it was a big one. I couldn't believe my ears. This was it. The information Richard had been asking for. I had to act fast. I had to get to Victor's office and get the files before anyone else found out what I had learned. I walked quickly, my heart pounding in my chest. When I reached Victor's office, I found the door slightly ajar. I hesitated for a moment before slipping inside. The room was empty, but his computer was still on. This was my chance. I walked over to his desk and quickly began searching through the files. My hands trembled as I opened one of the folders. It was everything I had been looking for, plans for a merger, a takeover, and something else that made my stomach turn. This was bigger than I thought. Victor wasn't just playing the corporate game. He was setting up something far more dangerous. I grabbed the documents I needed and left the office, my mind racing. This was it. The information Richard needed. I had everything I needed to take down Victor. But as I stood in the hallway, staring at the files in my hands, something strange hit me. This was no longer just about business. This was personal. I had become a part of something far bigger than myself, and I wasn't sure how to get out. I had made my choice. I was in this game now, and there was no turning back. The next few days were a blur. I passed the information along to Richard, and he was pleased, but there was something about the way he looked at me that made me uneasy. He knew I was playing a dangerous game, and he wasn't afraid to make sure I stayed in it. But the more time I spent with Richard, the more I realized that this wasn't just a partnership. It was a trap. I was losing myself in this world, and I didn't know how to get out. The tension between Victor and Richard continued to build. I was caught in the middle, playing both sides, trying to stay ahead of both of them. But I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep this up. I was losing control, and the more I tried to stay focused on the job, the more I felt myself slipping. I was no longer just playing the game. The game was playing me. I couldn't sleep that night. My mind was racing, replaying every moment from the past few weeks. I had gone from being a waitress to becoming a key player in a high-stakes game between two powerful men. Each day, I felt myself slipping further into a world where nothing was as it seemed. Victor had put me in the position of gathering information, but in doing so, he had pushed me to a place where I was now more than just a tool in his plan. I had become a part of something much bigger, something I wasn't sure I was ready for. Richard, on the other hand, was drawing me closer, his interest in me growing by the day. I had crossed a line with him, no doubt. He knew I wasn't just a harmless pawn in his world. There was a complexity to me that intrigued him, and I could feel the tension between us growing with each passing conversation. I couldn't deny it anymore. I was starting to feel something for him. But that was dangerous. I knew the consequences of getting too close to someone like Richard. He wasn't the kind of man you could trust easily, and I was already knee-deep in Victor's world. I had to be careful. The next day, I met with Victor in his office. He was sitting behind his desk, a confident smile playing on his lips as I walked in. "Anna, you've done well," he said, his voice smooth. "The information you've gathered has been invaluable." I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. I had played my part, but something in his eyes told me that this wasn't over. "I need you to do more," Victor continued, his tone serious. "Richard's next move is going to be crucial. We need to anticipate what he'll do before he does it." I swallowed hard, my mind racing. Victor wasn't just asking for information anymore. He was asking for my loyalty. "What do you need from me?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "I need you to get closer to Richard," Victor said, his eyes narrowing. "You've gained his trust, but now you need to use that. I want you to find out everything about his plans. What's his next move? What is he after? You have to make him believe that you're on his side." I felt a knot form in my stomach. I had already crossed so many lines, and now, Victor was asking me to betray Richard. I wasn't sure I could do it, but I had no choice. If I wanted to stay in the game, I had to keep playing by Victor's rules. I'll do it, I said, the words slipping from my mouth before I could stop them. I could feel the weight of the decision settle on my shoulders. I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep up this act. The lines between right and wrong, loyalty and betrayal, were becoming more and more blurred. That evening, I met Richard at his office. He was sitting at his desk, reviewing some documents, when I walked in. As always, he looked up, his eyes piercing as he assessed me. "Anna," he said, his voice warm, yet there was a certain edge to it. "What's on your mind?" I hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I've been thinking," I began, trying to keep my voice casual, "about everything that's been going on." Richard set the papers down and leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving mine. "What about it?" he asked. I took a deep breath. This was it. I had to make him believe that I was on his side, that I wasn't playing for Victor. "I'm with you, Richard," I said, my voice steady, even though my heart was pounding. "I believe in your vision. I think we could do great things together." Richard studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. For a moment, I thought he might not believe me. But then, a faint smile tugged at the corners of his lips. "I thought so," he said, his voice softening. "I can see it in your eyes. You're not like the others." I swallowed, trying to keep my composure. "I'm not," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I want to be part of something bigger, something real." Richard stood up and walked over to me, his presence commanding. "I knew I could count on you," he said, his voice low, almost intimate. "We're going to make something incredible happen. But you have to trust me, Anna. You have to trust me completely." I nodded, my heart racing. I knew what he wanted. He wanted me to trust him. And the more I spent time with him, the more I realized that trusting him might be the one thing that would change everything. As I left his office that night, my mind was a whirlwind of emotions. I had crossed another line, and there was no turning back now. I had become a part of Richard's world, and I wasn't sure where it was going to take me. But one thing was certain, I was playing a dangerous game. And I wasn't sure I was going to win. I had crossed the point of no return. Every decision I made felt like it was pushing me deeper into a game I couldn't escape. The lines were more blurred than ever before, and as much as I tried to keep my head above water, I was sinking. I had promised Victor that I would get close to Richard, find out what he was planning, and feed him the information he needed to beat his competition. But what I didn't realize was how much I was starting to blur the lines between my role as a spy and my own feelings. I was spending more and more time with Richard, and every conversation felt like it was pulling me further into his world. He was no longer just a business partner. He had become someone I couldn't ignore. The more I saw him, the more I understood the pull he had on people. He was magnetic, confident, and had an aura of power that seemed to be woven into every word he spoke. I saw the way people followed him, the way they hung on his every word, and I began to wonder how much I was starting to believe in his vision. I was supposed to be loyal to Victor, to gather information on Richard and help him destroy his empire. But the more I worked with Richard, the more I began to question my own loyalties. He had a way of making everything seem so clear, so simple. He wasn't just a businessman. He was a man with a mission, with a vision that went beyond profit. He spoke about changing industries, about transforming lives, and I found myself believing him. But I couldn't forget why I was there. I couldn't forget that Victor had given me a purpose, a mission. I was supposed to be loyal to him. I had promised him. But as the days went by, I realized how much my feelings for Richard had begun to shift. One evening, after another long day of meetings and discussions, Richard invited me to dinner again. I had become used to his invitations, but this one felt different. It wasn't just business anymore. This was personal. When I arrived at the restaurant, Richard was already waiting for me. He looked at me as I walked in, his eyes dark and intense. There was something different about him tonight. He was quieter than usual, more serious. He didn't greet me with his usual charm. Instead, he just gestured for me to sit down. "You've been on my mind a lot, Anna," he said, his voice low. "I know we've been working together for a while now, but I need to know something." My heart skipped a beat. What was he going to ask me? "What is it?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need to know if you trust me," Richard said, his eyes never leaving mine. I felt my breath catch in my throat. He was asking me a question I wasn't sure I had an answer to. "I've told you everything about myself," he continued. "I've been upfront with you, but I need to know if you feel the same way, if you believe in what I'm doing." The tension in the air was thick. I could feel the weight of his words pressing down on me. I had been playing this game for so long, lying to both Victor and Richard, but now the truth was staring me in the face. I was standing at a crossroads. If I answered this question, it could change everything. I could either commit fully to Richard's side and turn my back on Victor, or I could remain loyal to the man who had given me everything, even though I wasn't sure if I believed in his vision anymore. I looked at Richard, searching for the right words. But the truth was, I didn't have an answer. I didn't know what to say. He was right. He had opened up to me in ways no one had before. He had shown me a side of him that no one else had ever seen. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was truly seen. But did that mean I trusted him? Did that mean I was ready to walk away from Victor and everything I had built with him? I wasn't sure. I don't know, I said, my voice shaky. I'm not sure I'm ready to make that decision yet. Richard's expression softened. He didn't seem angry or disappointed. Instead, he nodded, as if he understood exactly what I was going through. I get it, he said quietly. I know this isn't easy, but when you're ready to decide, I'll be here. The words hung in the air between us. And for the first time, I realized that Richard wasn't just a businessman to me. He was more. He had become something I wasn't ready to confront. I spent the rest of the dinner in silence, my mind spinning with everything he had said. I could feel the pull of his presence, the way he made me feel like I mattered. It was intoxicating. But in the back of my mind, I knew I couldn't ignore the truth. I was playing a dangerous game, and the longer I stayed in it, the harder it would be to walk away. When I left the restaurant that night, I knew one thing for sure. I was at a crossroads. And no matter which path I chose, there was no going back. I had never been one to back down from a challenge. But this was different. The stakes were too high. The more I spent time with Richard, the more I realized how much he had become a part of my life. Not just a business partner, not just a man I was using to get ahead, but someone I genuinely respected, someone I had started to care about. I had told myself that I could keep my emotions in check, that I could continue playing this game without getting involved. But the truth was, I was already too far in, and there was no turning back. It had been days since our dinner, since Richard had asked me to make a choice, and I still hadn't given him an answer. I didn't even know what the right answer was. I had spent so many years running, trying to survive, never allowing myself to feel anything beyond the next paycheck, the next task. But now, for the first time in years, I was feeling something I wasn't sure I could control. The guilt of what I had agreed to with Victor weighed heavily on me. I had become an informant, feeding Richard's competitor with everything I could gather from Victor's empire. But the more I gave, the more I started questioning my own motivations. What was I really doing? Was I helping Richard to take down Victor out of loyalty, or was it because I had started to see a future with him that I didn't have with anyone else? The longer I thought about it, the more the answer became clear. I didn't know anymore. And that terrified me. That morning, I walked into Victor's office, my mind made up. It had to end. I couldn't keep deceiving both men any longer. I had made my choice. But as I stood in front of Victor's desk, his eyes hard as he watched me, I realized that even if I had decided, the consequences would still follow me. Anna, Victor said, his voice sharp, his tone one I had heard 100 times before. I need you to focus. Richard's company is about to make its move. We need to be prepared, and you're the only one who can make sure we stay ahead. I nodded, but inside, I could feel the turmoil building. I had to tell him the truth, but I couldn't bring myself to say it yet. Not like this. Not in front of the man who had given me a chance when no one else would. I've been gathering everything you asked for, I said, my voice steady. We're in a good position. I'll keep you updated. Victor leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing. Good, he said slowly, studying me. But I want to remind you, Anna, that you're in this with me now. No turning back. And if you ever think of backing out, you'll regret it. His words sent a chill through me. I knew exactly what he meant. He had control over my life now, and there was no way I could escape without consequences. I nodded again, unable to say anything. The silence between us was heavy, filled with unspoken words. I'll keep you updated, I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. When I left his office, I felt a knot in my stomach. The tension between loyalty and ambition was suffocating. I knew I couldn't keep playing both sides forever. But how could I choose? Victor had given me everything, but Richard had shown me what it could be like to have someone truly see me. Someone who didn't just see me as a tool to get what he wanted, but as an equal. Someone who was willing to trust me with everything. But it wasn't that simple. It never was. That afternoon, Richard asked me to meet him at his office. The message he sent was brief, but there was something in it that made my heart race. "We need to talk," it said. When I arrived, Richard was standing by the window, looking out at the skyline. He didn't turn when I walked in, and I could feel the tension in the room, the air thick with anticipation. "Anna," he said, his voice low, "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about trust. And I want to know if you're ready to take the next step with me." I felt my heart race again. This was the moment I had been dreading. The moment when everything would come to a head. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Richard finally turned to face me, his eyes dark and serious. "I need you to make a choice," he said. "Victor or me. You can't keep playing both sides. If you want to be with me, I need to know that you're committed. No more secrets. No more lies." I froze, my mind spinning. I had known this moment was coming, but now that it was here, I wasn't ready for it. "I can't just choose, Richard," I said, my voice shaking. "I've already made too many choices, too many mistakes." He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "Then let me help you make the right one," he said, his voice softening. "I can't do this without you, Anna. I can't do this without your trust." His words hit me harder than I expected. They weren't just words. They were a plea. A plea for something real. Something beyond the business. Beyond the empire we were both caught up in. I stood there, paralyzed, unsure of what to say. I had to make a choice, but I didn't know if I was ready. And as I looked into Richard's eyes, I realized that the game I had been playing had stopped being a game. It was real now. And no matter what I chose, there would be consequences. I had no idea how I was going to make it through, but one thing was clear: my life was no longer my own. I was caught between two powerful forces, and I couldn't escape. I sat in Richard's office, the silence between us deafening. I could feel the weight of his gaze, the anticipation hanging in the air like an unspoken question. My heart was racing, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't know what to do. I had been playing a dangerous game for so long. I thought I understood the rules. But now, everything had changed. The moment he had asked me to choose between him and Victor, I realized how deep I was in this mess, and how impossible it would be to find my way out. Richard stepped closer, his presence overwhelming, and for a moment, I could feel the vulnerability in his eyes. "Anna," he said softly, "I need to know. Are you with me? Can I trust you?" His words pierced through the fog of my thoughts, and for a split second, I wanted nothing more than to give him the answer he was waiting for. But my mind kept drifting back to Victor, the man who had given me a chance, the man who had molded me into who I was now. I could feel his grip on me, even though I had known from the start that I was a tool in his game. Richard's eyes didn't leave mine, and I could see the uncertainty in them, just like I felt in myself. "You don't have to choose right now," he said, his voice quiet, as though reading my mind. "But you need to decide soon. I can't keep playing this game if I'm not sure where you stand." The pressure was suffocating. I had never been good at making decisions under pressure, and this felt like the biggest decision of my life. I had already crossed so many lines. I had betrayed Victor's trust, and in doing so, I had betrayed myself. But Richard made me feel like I could be something more than just someone else's pawn. I was standing at a crossroads, torn between two men who both held pieces of my future in their hands. But for all his promises, Victor had never made me feel the way Richard did, like I was seen, truly seen. But was that enough? Was I ready to leave behind everything I had worked for just for the promise of something new? I took a deep breath, my hands trembling slightly. "I can't do this anymore," I said, my voice low but firm. Richard's eyes widened slightly, but he didn't interrupt me. "I can't keep lying to myself. I've spent so long trying to survive, trying to play the game. But I don't want to be anyone's pawn anymore. I want to make my own choices, even if they're the wrong ones." Richard's face softened, but there was still a hint of sadness in his eyes. "Anna," he whispered, reaching out and gently taking my hand in his. "You don't have to make this decision alone. We can figure this out together." But I knew, deep down, that this wasn't something I could share with anyone. This was my fight, my battle, and no matter how much Richard wanted to help, it was mine to face. "No, Richard," I said, pulling my hand away, my heart heavy with the weight of the words. "I have to do this by myself. I've been playing this game for so long, but I need to take control now. Richard didn't argue. He didn't say anything, just stood there, watching me as I made my choice. And in that moment, I realized that I wasn't afraid anymore. I had spent so long trying to survive in a world where I didn't belong, but now, for the first time, I was ready to take control of my own destiny. The game was over. I had made my decision. And no matter what happened next, I was going to face it head on. The next few days were a blur of decisions and consequences. I ended my dealings with Victor, no longer willing to be his pawn in his endless game of power. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when I wondered if I had made the right choice. But I knew that if I stayed with Victor, I would lose myself completely. And I couldn't let that happen. With Richard, things were different. It wasn't just about business anymore. It was about something real, something that went beyond the money and the power. I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid to find out. The road ahead was uncertain, but I was no longer afraid of the unknown. I had taken control of my own life, and that was all that mattered. And as I walked out of the office for the last time, I knew one thing for sure. I had made the right choice. I was finally free. Discover a world filled with emotion and powerful decisions in this compelling narrative that explores loyalty, love, and the consequences of the choices we make. From the cold, calculated world of a successful billionaire to the heartfelt struggles of a woman caught in a web of trust and deception, this story weaves touching stories that will leave you on the edge of your seat. The characters are brought to life as they navigate through the highs and lows of their emotional journeys, where betrayal and loyalty collide. Through the lens of these touching stories, we explore what it means to find yourself amidst chaos, and the price one pays for the pursuit of power and love. These touching stories are not just about the choices we make, but the relationships we build and destroy along the way. The characters' personal growth, their realizations, and the consequences of their actions create a deeply moving and relatable experience that resonates with anyone who has ever faced a life-altering decision. As the tension rises and the stakes get higher, these touching stories will tug at your heartstrings, leaving you to wonder what you would do in their shoes. The journey of self-discovery, loyalty, and love unfolds in a way that captivates your emotions, making these touching stories unforgettable. With every turn of events, the emotional depth of these characters and the choices they make will keep you hooked until the very end, reminding us all that sometimes the hardest decisions are the ones that shape who we truly are.